Hello and welcome to Verum Fabula Fellowship Podcast. I'm Wes Mullins.
And I'm Randy Hardman, and we will be your hosts today. It is our goal to bring you content that cultivates and enriches your daily interactions and encourages the refinement of character and intellect. The terrain we cover ranges from literature to philosophy to theology. It is our hope that through these lenses we can offer insight to the human experience and the human condition that is empowering and transformative.
Verum Fabula Fellowship is located in the beautiful town of Wilmore, Kentucky, and the podcast takes place at Drinkling's Roastery on Main Street. This is also where the fellowship meets regularly and where members are encouraged to present new thoughts and ideas, engage with interesting and important topics in discussion seminars, and interact with and listen to keynote speakers invited in to challenge us intellectually and spiritually. It is a true intellectual collective. Please rate this podcast on iTunes, and if we've said things that are helpful, be sure to tell your Lewis and Tolkien friends about us. With no more ado, here we go. Further up and further in. All right, good morning, everyone. This is Wes Mullins here with Randy Hardman, and we're at Drinkling's Roastery in Wilmore, Kentucky.
It is snowing outside.
It is. It looks like, somebody said Narnia. It does have that Narnia-esque feel about it.
Definitely not Narnia.
No.
Narnia with gutters.
Yeah.
I'd say that.
Well, the drive-in from my house looked like Narnia.
Okay.
So the kids and I and the wife all went sledding this morning, and that was fantastic. Because you get a lot of speed up on our hills out there.
Yeah.
So I took the dog with me.
There you go.
On one of the sleds. So.
We have a baby, so we don't dare go outside in the snow with the baby. Got to bundle them up. They hate it the whole time.
Yeah, that's true.
Got the diapers. They poop as soon as you put them in it, so, it becomes superfluous.
The little joys of parenthood that you get to go through. It's 2020.
Okay.
This is the first podcast of 2020 for us. That is the Jack and Beren part of the podcast that we missed last year. So last year you had a bit of a rough go the last half of the year.
Oh yeah, I mean we're still in terms of Drinklings itself, we're still in that initial developmental phase. We haven't even hit our first year yet, and so with that we were hitting the ground running when we started, and you got a lot of audibles you got to make and stuff like that, a lot of late nights and stuff. So I obviously appreciate you carrying the bulk of not just the podcast but the VFF, and I'm excited. This year looks a lot smoother, and the groups have actually been able to be probably at actually 100% of the groups so far.
That's right, you
have. So that's not something I could say last time.
You've been in all the groups this year.
You're gonna keep that streak going.
Yeah. It was really cool to see what happened with Verum, how it started out and how it ended the year. It was really cool.
Well, I think there's something there. I mean, when you look at the Inklings originally, there's a rotation that's there, and you have a core membership that kind of stays involved. Yeah. But even Tolkien and Lewis themselves weren't in it from the very beginning to the end. And so it went through transitions, and sometimes people could be more involved, and other times other people needed to pull more weight. And so I just thank you guys for pulling that weight and keeping it going.
Well, what I found out was the people who made up the core group now, they actually needed this.
Right.
And it was so cool to see some of the members come and say, no, this has helped my spiritual journey. This has helped me. I'll miss anything in life, but I don't miss Verum.
Right.
And I'm like, what? So this thing that we put together, and some of it was a bit for selfish reasons because I'd always wanted a literary group to be a part of, and there's some other things in there that it actually has been a spiritual boon for people and something that they don't miss. Like one of our friends, one of the members, flew in from Scotland and got off the flight and drove here to make sure they didn't miss the meeting.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know that I would have done that.
It's community, man. I mean, and that's, that was one of the nice things about the Inklings themselves is as much of a literary group as they were. They're also a formational group, and I suspect that you would have had, the same kind of things happening there. If somebody had been out of town, but they made sure that they got to the Inklings event that night.
Yeah.
We need more of that.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is since the core group's been here, other people who were original members early on have started to come back.
Right.
And so we had our largest group, not that numbers matter, but it just, the room was full.
Right.
We usually have between 5 and 6, and we had 10 the other night.
Right.
And it didn't feel like, it felt normal to have the 10, and it didn't feel like, oh, we have a new person in here, how their personality is going to mesh with the group. Because the way we do the group really now is there's a bit of reading, and then we just basically wrestle out an idea that presents itself to someone who has that, like, oh, I have this thought with this thing, or maybe I'll facilitate a question and try to provoke some thought, and people just they gravitate towards it, and they found, oh, this is my spot. This is where I come in, and it's been really cool just to see people finding community and finding their voice. Because that's one of the things that I remember Walter Hooper telling me about Lewis.
Right.
In the Inklings was he didn't talk all the time,
right.
Although they made jokes about
how he talked all the time.
But he said actually a lot of times what he would do is he would get people to find their own genius.
Right.
And I've so seen that in people. You watch the lights come on, and people who are like introverts are now stepping into this and going, hey, this is my theology. These are my thoughts, and this is I can do this. I can think this deep, and right. So it's been fantastic to see that happen. We have a new director of communications, which is pretty cool. Someone to take care of some stuff, and so we still defining the terms for Caitlin.
Right.
But she's been one of those that we're going to get her on a podcast. But it's been one of those where this has been monumental in her life.
Right.
This group, and we were talking the other night, and this is not something that I think she would keep hidden. But she was saying that the more you grow in your theology, the more people who refuse to grow in their theology, there's a chasm that begins to grow even inside the church. People that don't want to become deeper, the community starts to break apart at that point because you're like running and this person is like sedentary. And she's like, I'm glad I have people to run with.
Yeah.
And that was a cool thing.
Well, and with genuineness too. I mean, that's the big part of that. I mean, your chasms develop in theology all the time, and if it can happen in a positively formational community, it's far better than it happening you becoming a jerk.
Right. Yes.
That is one reason some people choose not to go into deeper theology, because the way that it's been translated to them before has been in just jerky kind of terms, or better than thou, or smarter than thou, or something like that. And so that's why I think the model of Inklings is so good. But I think seeing what is happening here has been really good as well, because I think we are touching that same kind of spirit.
Yeah, and me growing up in a really legalistic denomination and full of arrogance and pride, and then both of us seeing on the apologetic side of things how that arrogance plays into it, and you're like, I don't want to be that person.
Yep.
Don't want to be that guy. And my wife for years growing up, because she went to Asbury, and for years she didn't like the seminary students because all they wanted to do was argue theology. And she was like, I just want to talk about Jesus. And there was that chasm, somebody being the jerk and always correcting you theologically. And she's like, I don't know.
Well, to be fair, having gone to the seminary, there's a lot of seminarians who don't want to talk with seminarians because they can be jerks too. So it's not just a one side of the street, kind of thing. Okay. So it's a continual challenge for anybody who wants to think deeply and not to be a jerk.
That's funny. There's a movie, I'm going to give myself away here, but there's a movie, Pitch Perfect, too.
I have not seen that.
There's a German group, a cappella group, that's called Sound Machine. One of their lead actors actually was interviewed for another movie he was doing. It's just the context of how I know him. And he's German, and so the interviewer says, do you think is it offensive to you that the villains in most movies are German? And he goes, no. Have you seen our history? It's absolutely horrible. He goes, even when Germans make movies, the villains are Germans. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, yeah, well, that's pretty self-aware. You go, seminarians don't like seminary.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I mean, it's a good start to 2020. We've been diving into, you picked this one, right? Transposition, or was it
Yeah, so the reason why I think it's gone this way is we started out with myth, and true myth and fairy tales and things, and then we got into the Great Divorce.
Right.
So it brings up the issues of heaven and hell. And then we went into Leaf by Niggle just because it was so powerful to me. And I was like, it's another wrestling of heaven,
right,
and the afterlife. And then we went to Weight of Glory, which also begins to talk about what's our purpose, and then I was thinking, well, we're kind of digging down this thing of pulling apart heaven and hell and purpose and design, and then go, well, what's the foundation below that? Well, that's our epistemology.
Right.
And so, how do we know what we know? And then you get into, well, what about language? What's the language we use? And then you get, well, language is mainly metaphorical and analogous.
Right.
And then you go, well, Lewis has a great essay on that called Transposition, where we talk about language being metaphorical. And when you have something that's multidimensional, when you bring it into a lower dimension,
right,
there can't be a one-to-one correlation because that dimension, because it's lower, is disallowed to have the same things in it, the same epistemologies.
Right.
And so I was like, this is great for people to come through and begin to wrestle with. You have these ideas of heaven. Why do you have these ideas of heaven?
Right.
And so I think Lewis gives us a great ground to wrestle with some of this stuff.
Have you read this one before?
Transposition?
Yeah,
I've listened to it several times.
Right, this is my first read through on this, so I'm the newbie in this conversation. Of course, there's a lot of those themes that exist in other parts of his writing and things like that. So, that's the beauty of Lewis, is usually where you see him talk about something somewhere, he'll expound on it at a different place. And so
he rarely says things that are contradictory, and his propositional points are rarely. They keep coming up through that, and you're like, oh, this. Now he may revise a statement as he gets older.
Oh, sure, he changes.
But usually, it's the logic state remains the same.
Right.
He may come through. I mean, that's what happened with Anscombe. He just didn't have the analytical acumen to answer a question.
Right.
It wasn't that his logic was wrong. He just didn't have the ability to answer that. And as he got older, I think he would have been able to have done that. But yeah, Transposition is a fantastic essay because it's something that I wrestle with myself in language, because I began to, when I got into apologetics, I began to have, we have these statements, we have these words, and then you have these presuppositional things that are in there. Where does all this stuff come from?
Right.
Well, how do we get it? And then in epistemology, like, how do I know what I know? And when you begin to pull that down, you get to language, and then you realize that language is limited.
Right.
And then you see in Genesis where God says stuff. And you go, oh, well, the Trinitarian relationship has communicative abilities.
Right.
Well, there are things that, there has to be a language that he's using that we don't have a one-to-one on.
Oh, yeah.
And so at that point I started going, oh, so there's some transcendent expression I'm trying to get to. And hopefully, as I use language, I get closer and closer to that thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, unless you were a literalist, you don't go into Genesis and think that, especially in the case of there being nothing, that God audibly spoke into the nothingness, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't have vocal cords, and
right.
And so we from the very beginning of Genesis, no pun intended, but from the very beginning, Genesis, we get metaphor. We get approximation for that. And so that's a lot of what Lewis is wrestling with here is what do we do with these approximations? Does that, when we approximate something, does it invalidate it? Or is there something different going on?
So what I began to wrestle with at an early age in the apologetic world was the levels of approximation, right? There's things that are utterly false.
Right.
There are things that are less true. There are things that are true. There are things that are more true.
Right.
But we will never get to this absolute truth. We can get into objective truth, but I don't think we can ever get to absolute truth here, because I don't think that we see through a glass darkly. So I don't know that we can ever get to say this thing is absolutely true.
Right.
And for me, that's actually comforting, because I think that we try to wrestle with certainty. And I think that's one of the things in the church and me growing up that I always wrestled with was, as humans, we want to wrap up a conclusion, a premise, and proposition, inclusion, and go, okay, I have this narrative now; it's complete,
right?
And I'm certain that it's true. And that's how you get denominationalism, and that's how you get chasms.
That's how you get pride.
That's how you get pride. I know this thing to be true, and I have smashed and broken my theology over and over and over and over again. And each time, I feel like there's maybe less that I'm certain of, but the things that I can actually grab a hold of are more solid.
Right.
And
it's that whole as you grow older, the less you realize that you know, but you do become more certain in the small handful of things that you really do know.
Yes, and it's actually more comforting. But when you're younger, it's like you want to be certain of everything. And as I let go of that certainty and go, well, God's omniscient, I'm not. Lewis gives us a chance here to look at the reason why. Number one, we want to be certain, but number two, I think it gives us comfort to say that the people you're wrestling against, the naturalists, the other things, they're looking at life from a natural perspective.
Right.
And if you look at life from a natural perspective, it's only natural that you would come to these conclusions. Like if you look at everything from the lower transpositional level as a one-to-one, the only thing you're ever going to come up with is humanism at best, nihilism at the logical end,
right,
or deterministic nihilism. And so Lewis says, well, what if that's not completely true? What if there's something else? And
what if it's not a one-to-one?
What if it's not a one-to-one?
Right.
And then he talks about, the beautiful example he gives is that if you have a Beethoven's piano concerto, or whatever you have these pieces by Beethoven, you go, and you want to transposition that to a guitar.
Right.
It's not going to be a one-to-one.
Can we define real quick what we mean, just even basically, by the term transposition? Because I think that can throw some people off.
Yeah. So my
who comes to an essay entitled Transposition and thinks, let's read this.
Of course.
Well, yeah.
But so transposition is when you have a high concept, a complex concept or an idea. So you can think of it like you have an algebraic formula of something, and you want to be able to express this to someone who doesn't understand the algebraic formula. And so you come up with some rhetorical, lesser metaphor for it. And so you're taking a high concept and you're making it. It's like taking an academic statement and then making it a rhetorical soundbite.
Right.
Is what you're doing. And so Lewis is saying basically that there is a very complex algebraical matrix, if you will, to the world, but we see it through one lens, and it's not the one-to-one. Like the whole matrix is running, but you don't see the matrix. What you see is a likeness that's being projected to you. And so he's saying that it's not a one-to-one. So it's taking a high level and making it identifiable and relatable into a lower level.
Right.
Yeah, that probably muddied the waters.
No, I mean I think that's it is a form of translation that's happening, but with those approximations, right? With the reality that you have to use, because you have a difference in kind, you have to you have to speak or deliver in a different sort of not through a different medium, maybe through a different medium, but at least with a different outcome, that's going to represent something accurately, but maybe a bit more simplistically.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's usually what we try to do with rhetoric. That's why I kind of go, or we say something is like something else.
It's how we speak to kids.
It's how we speak to children.
You take very complex ideas and you have to bring them down. And you still want the essence of that to be true, for it to be 100% true, and yet recognize, explaining atomic energy in all its complexities. We need transposition. You and I would need transposition from the atomic scientists, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand it in the same fullness. Maybe not in the same complexities, but the same fullness.
So you bring up a great point. So what we're looking at these physical things that even need transposition, like atomic energy, light refracting. The blue sky, why is the sky blue? It's not really blue, but we see transposition as how we can express it and explain it. So I think the good thing that Lewis gives us here is he gives us this ground to say, okay, the natural world is even transposition. There's even a higher and lower levels in the natural world, and how through our conscious mind we can interpret this.
Right.
And so in that interpretation, we go, okay, atomic energy is like this, or this is like this, or a father is like this, and sons. So we have the physical world. Now, what happens when we have certain emotions and things that are metaphysical? And I think that Lewis gives us a chance to even go, okay, let's wrestle with some metaphysical stuff here.
Right.
Love. Right? What is it? How do you express that? And it's not physical, like, well, you have an algebraic problem, and let me give you a simple answer. Let me, you have this algebra problem here. Let me draw you a cartoon to explain. That's an interpretation and transposition. How do you talk about love, and how do you talk about this echo of a tune not heard? This call that Lewis says, because I have a desire that can't be fulfilled on this earth. Can't be satisfied.
Yep.
It means I'm not for this world. What is this thing that I can't express? Because there's something deeper there, and the only words I have to use are the natural words, because I'm limited in that. And so I think for some people are like, because you can't put your finger on it. And if you say that, spirituality is simply just emotion.
Right.
And somebody's like, that doesn't ring true.
Well, I think you're kind of leading to something that I thought about. I think one of the reasons why, and Lewis points this out, that sometimes people dismiss the metaphysical claims, right, and those realities, is that it's because of the approximations, because it's like if we don't have another better way to describe something, therefore it invalidates it, right? And I think on the flip side of that, it can also be very discouraging for us to say we don't have language to describe what's going on, so we have to approximate, and that almost seems to frustrate us, right? And I think there can be something freeing in accepting the fact that this is the way that spiritualities are conveyed, right? And that there's no shame in that. And the fact that we can only get so close because of the nature of who we are, right? And the kind that we are, that we will never be able to get to the being able to fully express in linguistic. We're just limited, And it's like a child, right? Who, again, just going back to that idea, right? It's that for a child to feel confident in understanding a concept, they don't need to be able to speak of it in all of the complexities that they don't know how to speak of,
Exactly.
right? I shouldn't say, right? Now I don't really understand atomic energy, but I don't need to be Einstein, right, to have a comfortable grasp on it, because the moment that you set yourself up to say, I need to be Einstein to speak about this at all, means that nobody except for Einstein can speak about this, and so you should always feel inadequate about that. And Lewis is saying, I think here, listen, none of us, are Einsteins, right? we have the best that we are capable of doing.
Yes.
That shouldn't put us in a position of either disregarding it completely and saying because we can't speak of it, we have to throw it away, or saying because we can't speak of it, we're inadequate or it's inadequate. You know, and I think both levels that can be freeing, because you're just allowing yourself to say whatever it is that whatever spiritual reality is occurring, right? I'm never going to be able to have the words to describe it. I have approximation, and that's okay. That's good, because that's the way we are designed.
Yeah, and so what you get on the frustration level is you have people like Richard Dawkins, an atheist, who are going, well, the why question is incomprehensible at a lower level.
Right.
So therefore the why question is not important. And so he says you shouldn't ask the why question. You should only ask the how question.
Right.
And then you look at that and you say, well, but I still have the why question.
Right.
So that answer is inadequate. So you either have to ignore the higher level stuff coming in and the approximations and say, well, I just have an approximation, that's okay.
Right.
Or you have to say the approximation is correct.
Right.
And that you don't need anything else. And I think that people have gotten frustrated and said, okay, I'll just give in to Dawkins.
Right.
But what's interesting is I've had conversations with people, and this is not my analogy, but it's John Lennox's analogy. And he probably got it from somewhere else. But it was, I asked this young atheist, why does a pot boil?
Why does what?
Why does a pot boil?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, it's the...
You mean water in a pot or a pot?
I'm saying yes. Water in a pot.
I was wondering if you've had a scientific experiment that I've not had.
Yes. Why does a pot of water boil? And he said, well, it's because it's the molecules creating friction because of the heat and the thermodynamics and all this. And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely correct. I said, or I wanted a cup of tea.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly, the agency and mechanism, consciousness and physicality really pull at that, and then that answer is inadequate.
It's a completely different why question. Right?
Completely different, and so you're looking for different answers.
But again, even there, we're limited. I mean, of course, you could draw that out through more words and stuff like that, right?
But you're never going to hit it.
But the simple question of why, right? And there may be things that are unspeakable, in that question of why, right? Why does, why do you love your wife? You can only go so far in truly describing that. Why do you love your kids? And at the very end of it, you're realizing that everything that you're going to say is going to always fall up short
every time.
But that doesn't invalidate it. And it shouldn't frustrate you. I think Lennox, by the way, he drew that actually from Lewis. I think that was a similar analogy. That
he uses a lot of Lewisian analogies, and as I was saying that, I felt like that Lewis probably did say that, and Lewis probably got it from Chesterton.
Yeah, probably. Chesterton got it from his mom.
Right.
I think, but on that other side, you have your Richard Dawkins, but then the flip side of that is you have those existentialists, right, that are constantly in the journey is the journey is for the sake of its own sake, right? The journey is there for its own sake, and I think oftentimes you see in existentialist philosophers that frustration that they can never quite grasp what they're trying, like what they're tasting, right? Like they can never fully describe it, and they're frustrated by that. And so, again, like you have this like validation or inadequacy going on. And I think that's the beauty of transposition, is that it's saying here's a way we avoid the inadequacy or the invalidation, and we can actually have what it is that we're tasting, right, and be okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way of putting that. And there's so many. What my goal in bringing up the reading for Beren is to put us on a journey of self-discovery, in a sense.
Yeah.
And to go, I've never asked this question. And it's uncomfortable because you have to pull it apart and you have to look at things you've never looked at before. And then as you're pulling it apart, you say something, and somebody's like, "No, I don't get that."
Yeah.
And then suddenly now you have this other sentient, free will agent who also is in their consciousness working, and they're pulling it apart. And the goal is for us to use our limited metaphorical analogous language, our transpositional states, to try to get as close as we can to the actual transcendent thing.
Right.
And to me, there's that proverb that I love to quote. It says, "It's the glory of God to conceal things, but it's the glory of kings to seek them out."
Yeah.
And that we come with mystery. And this is why I think, for me, Sherlock Holmes is so important in my life, because he's able to see the things others don't see, because he thinks so much about pulling these things apart, and that life is mystery.
Right.
But the point of it is not to say life is mystery and throw your hands up and say life is mystery. Let's see where this leads.
Right.
Let me see how close I can get to truth or true.
Well, and that's one of the things. I mean, just going back, of course, folks can go listen to the actual conversation that we had. But one of the things I really liked about this essay is, Lewis gets into this question of when we're feeling something, a sense. I think he uses the words joy or dread or something like that, right?
Anguish,
joy and anguish being very much phenomenologically the same sort of thing, right?
Right.
And the danger is that if we run the risk of saying that there is a one-to-one, then we have to equate joy and anguish as being the same thing. The question that I had through that was, especially, 65, 70 years now after Lewis was writing all of this, and I think this is a lot of what this essay is really good for, is it caused a lot of reflection. And as much as Lewis is reflective in his head, this is a different kind of reflection. And so I've been paying attention the past several days to the sensations that I've been feeling, whether they've been fear, or they've been guilt, or they've been, joy, or they've been, whatever it is, frustration, and wondering, is there a sensational difference between these feelings, right? So if I'm frustrated, is it the same feeling that I'm having when I'm happy, anxious, when I'm excited about something, right? In some ways, yes. In other ways, no, but there are potentially, this is just the question, are there differences that are there? So I think it's just an interesting thing. I don't think it invalidates his argument, but I think it opens up the possibility for us to be more specific with our language, which is always a good thing, even theologically, right? Not to just settle and say, I'm going to think about love, right? The word love, right? We can use that, but even the Greeks, as we've seen recently in a Super Bowl commercial, break that down into 4 different categories. Us Americans and Brits don't do that well,
Well, they created agape because they didn't have a word for it.
Yeah, and so you have, philos, and you have eros, and you have agape, and storgos, right? It's those 4 different kinds of love. And so I think it's just an interesting thing for me, and coming off of this piece, is to say, okay, I think Lewis is right about approximations as part of transposition. I think there's a challenge there, though, especially since he pushes in with the mystics and stuff like that, right? To be as specific as we can be, because I think that again also goes to help in helping people kind of not fall into the traps of invalidation or incoherence,
Right. I think that's...
Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. That's brilliant, because I was having thoughts myself over the past few days after our conversation, and I was thinking, how many times in life do we make the misinterpretation of phenomenological and sensory perceptions? So I see a woman who's attractive. Well, I feel attracted to my wife, which my reaction to that is to love her, to engage, and to go after her. But how many times do you see someone who's attractive and you don't have the same reaction to that?
Yeah.
And so attraction doesn't equal love, or doesn't equal that you need to enter in a relationship with that person. It just means that there is an emotion there, that when you're around a person, there's an energy or something that actually draws you to that person.
Right.
And some people go, I see this woman across the room, I'm attracted to her, therefore I'm falling in love.
Right.
And you go, whoa, that's a jump.
That's just puberty, man. That's all.
But we're
being under 22.
And so I was also thinking about, and I'm not making a declaration of this one way or the other, but I was also thinking about talking with David Whitaker about Band of Brothers.
Right.
And we see male bonding, and when men are at each other and they have this intimacy, David and Jonathan, Sherlock Holmes and Watson, we see this intimacy, and immediately and people are immediately going, well, that intimacy equals some sort of physical relationship, some sort of romantic relationship, and that transpositionally, you're looking at it and say, well, see, it's this. But if you're looking at a lower level, intimacy equals romantic.
Right.
You're going, but there's other levels of intimacy, and I think sometimes we make miscalculations because we have not self-reflected enough to go, why am I feeling this?
Right.
Is what actions are necessary to take here? And instead of going, okay, I feel intimate feelings with this person, therefore it equals relationship.
Right.
And it has helped me pull that apart a little bit and begin to go, what are these things going on? Because I've been around people before that I was drawn to, and you go, why am I drawn to them? And you go, well, it doesn't equal relationship. It doesn't have to equal that.
Right.
Or romanticism. It could be, there is a personality trait, or there is a certain, for lack of a better word, energy this person's giving off that I find comforting, and it makes me feel more relaxed, or it makes me feel whole, or it makes me feel something that equates to intimacy that I have with my wife. That I'm able to be vulnerable around them and things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to engage in a monogamous, intimate relationship with this individual. It just means that there's vulnerability there, and I connected with that.
Right.
And so that's why there's not the one-to-one. And then you begin to go, well, okay, so what else have I misinterpreted, in my life? And I think it helps. It does help with self-reflection so much to begin to pull apart our limitations, and then our misconceptions, and higher and lower, even in our three-dimensional world, four-dimensional world, whatever, that there are things going on here that are multidimensional.
Right.
And we're missing them. How many times have we said, well, God told me this, and then 10 years later we're like, yeah, I think I missed that. I think I was actually saying this because this seemed to work out differently.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, reality is rarely a one-to-one. Yeah, I think that's my big takeaway from all of this. And we haven't even gotten to the second half of this essay, and so I'm kind of excited to see where this leads. But that's the thing that I think, we should know this. I mean, just historically speaking, just if we really reflect on it, is that very few things in life are one-to-one. I think there are one-to-ones, but I think but in general, it's hard for us to see those. And I think that can be a very humbling and freeing thing, not to have that incorrigibility and certainty of everything. Because I often play this game. John Rawls kind of played this game a little bit in terms of what is the best kind of place to grow up in. You can see yourself outside of the world, and if you can choose a time and a place and whatever to put yourself in, that's the place we should aim for. And I've often thought, if we could stand outside of the world and actually see how people will look back on our particular era in history, what are the things that they're going to say, oh, they totally didn't get, they totally didn't understand. We look at things 50 years ago and we're like, idiots. They were idiots back then. How did they not see that how did they parse race out in the way that they did? How do you parse human inequality out in the way that you did? gender and stuff like that, and it's like inequality. And I'm like, man, but the fact is, in 100 years, people will be looking back at 2020 in hindsight, 2020 in hindsight, and look at us and say they totally didn't get it.
Morons,
So that's a humbling thing, because it just we have to realize, like, we don't get it. We're not the late great.
That's what we've seen with the millennials. We've seen the other generations. The whole phrase like "okay, boomer." You get this going on. Like, you guys messed the world up. Like, I can't believe how you guys were idiots. We, as being someone in the 40s from Gen X, people look at our generation before and go, "You guys were idiots." Well, you know what? We said the exact same things about about the baby boomers and about other generations. Going, how could you guys do this?
Oh yeah,
we're going to fix it. We're going to do it better. So when I hear a millennial or someone say that, I chuckle to myself, because the joke is, you're not going to get it either.
Nope.
And you're probably going to make it worse.
Oh, man.
Because we thought we had it all figured out.
We're just in the experimentation era, stage in history all the time.
Our epistemology is continuously growing, and it allows us to make better decisions. But then when we get certain propositional things wrong in there, then we got to go back and change the code. I'm like, oh no, we got that wrong. Got to fix that. And that's what I love about Lewis, is he's such a logician that he doesn't say anything unless he has figured it out 15 ways, and he's like, okay, I can't find a way that I'm wrong. I could be right in this, so let me present this to you. But it's always a presentation. It's never like, this is exactly how it is. He always gives us a presentation like, okay, I've wrestled with this until I can't wrestle anymore, so it's as far as I can go. Here you guys go. And I think that's what you'll see in the rest of Transposition. This has been one of my the most fun I've had reading an essay and listening to it. It's just it hits me in a way that this is what I was looking for. These were the ideas that I had churning my mind, but I couldn't get it out exactly the way I wanted. And Lewis does that so well in this essay.
I'm excited about the second half. So we get into that this Monday, right? Yeah,
Monday we'll get into the second half of the essay, and then we're going into a book that I've not read before, but one of our members recommended it, and Lewis actually makes the phrase in there. It calls people flatlanders.
I like flat earthers.
Little different, but he calls them flatlanders. And the book we're going to read actually is Flatland. It's a fictional book about interdimensional characters going to different dimensions and the transpositional frustrations and things that happen during those. Like a three-dimensional character goes into a two-dimensional world, and
that'd be cool.
So that's why there's such a good lead off from this is we're in Transposition, we're talking about this interdimensionality, and then that's the book we're going to read. Someone's fictionalized that from back in Lewis's time. And it should be known that Lewis wrote this in 1949.
Okay.
So this was also before his big revelations into even more spiritual things. And I mentioned that in one of the podcasts, that like miracles and things like that had not entered into his mind yet. The Eucharist, the Transpositional, and so some of this stuff wasn't yet polished.
Right.
And so this is 49. He's been a Christian for 18 years at this point.
Right.
But he still was in some early phases of some of his thinking, which we all are.
Yeah.
As we talked about. All right. So we will see you guys on Monday. And someone pointed out to me, you don't see people on podcasts, but we will be
metaphorically.
Transpositionally, we will see you. I'm limited in my language, so it's not a one-to-one. But we will talk to you guys on Monday. We will not get finished with Transposition, probably. We will get stuck somewhere along the way. But this has just been a whole lot of fun. So as for today, I have been Jack.
And I've been Beren.
Jack and Beren, the Jack and Beren Show. Anyway, thanks guys for listening. See you later.